Welcome back, everyone, to The Day with Trae. I'm your host, Trae Holiday. Joining me right now is Mr. Moses Masitha. Hi, Moses.
Hi, Trae.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for joining us on The Day with Trae today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, this is exciting because when I have a fellow thespian in the building, I love to get down to the innards of characterization. And before we get there, what got you to say, you know what, let me give this a try, let me give this a shot?
Yeah, honestly, it was who invited me to do so, right? When Michelle and Isaiah asked me to do this role, I was pretty excited simply because of the people that asked me to do it. And then following that was like, whoa, I get to portray Dr. King. That's a big deal, right? Yeah. So couldn't say no to that.
Well, it is a huge deal. Yeah. And I think the portrayal always, when I think about any iconic person in history that is portrayed on the stage, there's something so personal that I think a lot of us take away from that. And so when you think about the ways that you've been able to kind of understand, Dr. King in this role, tell us some of those peaks for you.
Yeah. Certainly walking into this role is that you get to learn about someone that very many people already know about. So you have to find your own unique things about him, right? And so for me, it's been really two things. One is Dr. King's commitment to this idea of nonviolence, firstly, but secondly, commitment to the human, right? He was a very human-centric person. So it mattered to him, for instance, that X was a man before he was a political activist. It mattered to him that the people that he encountered were human before they were anything else, every other title that they held. So I think learning that for me right now has been something very pleasant.
Yeah, well, that's a really great way of putting it, too. I think, we've always thought about his love for people, this kind of humanitarian perspective, but it's great to hear that, look, they were human first. Yeah. I think that does say a lot about what the ways that people experienced him. Yeah. When we think about, the fact that this also sometimes can be pretty deep, right? There's a lot of depths to his character that you have to bring out, and there's certain nodes that I think exist in people's minds about how they've experienced Dr. King. What are some of those ways that you've really dove into the characterization of him while you're, preparing for this role and this amazing show? Yeah,
I think there's a way that people could potentially dismiss him as being a pacifist just because he was a nonviolent person. But I think Dr. King was incredibly radical. I think in reading about him and studying who he was, I think the ideas he held for the time that he was in were extremely radical ideas. And I think as he engages in X, even in this fictionalized conversation, there's a realization between the two that though they may hold polar opposite ideologies, by the end of the conversation, they were in fact not that opposite of one another. They were both radicals in different ways. So I think for me, that idea has really resonated, that Dr. King was extremely radical. To love another person to the point where you want to humanize them is a radical act. There's a line that the playwright covers very well where King says that nonviolence for him is not something that he does because he likes it. He does it because it's right. It's a way of God, as it were, that invites people to participate in being more humane than they ever were. So I think to recognize him as radical is something very essential.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective. I too agree there, and I think you're absolutely right. More came out about Dr. King, kind of even after his death, was the idea of him, even the famous line, I think I've led my people to a burning bush. That I think never got the type of media coverage that all of the other speeches got. But when he got toward the end there, he was realizing some things that I think are really important, especially when we think about the differences that we experience kind of through media between he and Malcolm X. So I love hearing you say that, because I think that's also very true. And what I'm seeing in a lot of Black liberation movements now is the resurrection of that idea, the resurrection of that connection, honestly, between the two of them. Of course, both of them were gone too soon. And so I want to just ask you about kind of the ways maybe that's portrayed, because obviously when we think about some of the amazing radicals over the course of our history, many of them were young and gone too soon. And so how does that resonate with you as you take this character into life? Yeah,
there's a line in the show where X asks King about that, right? Says, were we in a different scenario, what kind of men would we be? And King responds and says, well, our lives would be pretty dull. which would also mean we'd live very long lives, right? So there's something about people who choose to respond to a calling like they did, that their lives tend to not be long, right? And that's not a bad thing necessarily for us. Of course, it's a bad thing that when you lose someone so young, but it's not a bad thing because ideas always outlive people. And as you're saying, right now in this era, these ideas that these people portrayed are being resurrected, right? So that's a beautiful thing, that we can now get an opportunity to essentially participate in a conversation that's been happening for so long, because it's time to resurrect those ideas, simply because we're being faced by similar issues that they were being faced with, right? What was happening in the 60s has found a way to come back to the 21st century, but it's calling a new type of radical, a new type of activist, a new type of individual who will respond to that call to be the one that's responsive to that. So I think I'm very aware as I portray this character to want to bring all those things along. That one is a participation with history. We're engaging with a fictionalized version of history here. But secondly, it's social commentary. We've entered into the current. We haven't left it to the past.
Yeah, that's a very important part here and point to bring up. And it really brings to note for me, like, there's always these personal kind of attributes when we are, portraying a character that we have to draw from, right? In terms of being able to emote, so the audience experiences those nuances of the conversation as it progresses in this show. Tell us about some of those things for you, where you're drawing from those kind of personal experiences to bring that out for the audience.
So I tell you what, this has probably been the harder aspect of portraying Dr. King for me. There's a portion where Dr. King speaks about the first march he ever led, and he takes us down memory lane about what that looked like. Now, of course, as you've just mentioned, the politics is very personal. I grew up in South Africa at a time when the country was very transitional, an era of a lot of marches. I was kicked out of university because I led a protest march. So there's things there to me that become very traumatic. And I don't know if Isaiah could say Moses hasn't hit some notes emotionally that we want him to hit, but part of it is because it's painful to go there, right? And although this script, of course, is a reimagining of an interaction, but in reality, the personal is political, and it's calling a lot of trauma out for a lot of people. And so I will get there. We'll hit the notes, but there's an awareness on my part that there's a difficulty to get there sometimes.
Yeah, well, this is exactly why I think these kind of breakthroughs are what the audiences experience. And that's, I know for me, when I was on stages, like, that was a huge part of it for me, was, if I can't open up that piece of me, it doesn't always come through. And so I appreciate you sharing that, because that's like a personal thing. So thank you for sharing that. When we think about, being a part of a cast, there's always this kind of layer of, connection of the collective that I think is also really important to speak about. And I want to hear from your perspective how it's been to work with your fellow cast members on this show.
It's been incredible, right? So Isaiah, who's directing the play, a luminary in the Seattle area, highly regarded, and someone that I had met previously, and now engaging with him in a work environment like this, my honor for him has just grown immensely. A lot of the cast as well, phenomenal people, both in terms of gifting, but what they've done beyond the stage in the city, right? Sean Good becomes someone who's, he plays X, and he sits directly opposite to who I am. But I'm learning him, and I'm enjoying learning that aspect of him. And because I have an outsider perspective, this South African who now engages in Seattle culture, as it were, right? These guys have been incredibly welcoming to me. Sean has opened his arms, he's opened his intellectual sense of home for me to interrogate that, to ask questions of him philosophically, ideologically, and he's really been open to respond to me in the affirmative. So I feel incredibly affirmed by the cast that I'm a part of.
That says something major, and I think it really also speaks volumes to Acts on Stage's approach to these shows, right? I mean, we're talking about uplifting local talent, and as Isaiah said, sometimes these are folks who this is their first time in the state. So what that means, in terms of them understanding, like, whoa, wait a minute, I can do this, or maybe I want to do this more, or oh, I don't know, it made me open up. So there's so many different things that I think come out because Acts on Stage has this, approach that's really loving and welcoming and inviting in that regard. And so I love hearing you say that you're experiencing that with the other cast members. Of course, course, Moses, I got to give you time. You two get to plug the show. You got to tell people why they need to come and see this amazing show, King X, The Meeting. Look right there in that camera. Let them know why they need to come and see this show.
Hey, we would love for you to come and see the show, really for two reasons. As I've already stated, you get to participate in a reimagining of a fictionalized conversation between X and Dr. King, really something that many of us feel like we were shortchanged from. But secondly, not only is this a historical moment, it's really a moment to participate in current social issues, for you to offer social commentary and become a part of that. Bring your ideologies to the table, bring your philosophies to the table. They are all welcome because we are in the space of collaborative conversations. We would love to see you there, March 1st to the 3rd, and then March 7th to the 10th. I think you can find your tickets at show/X, and we would love to get your tickets there. See you soon.
Moses, thank you so much for being with me. It's been a pure pleasure.
Thank you, Trae. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Y'all, he gave you the reasons why you need to go there. Of course, I'm going to give you some more right after this short break. Stay tuned. You're watching The Day with Trae.